Thor's chief executive finally admitted what the pricing, the inventory, and the dealer lots have been showing for months. The electric motorhome market didn't cool off, it collapsed. And when a CEO uses language that is blunt, it means the internal data left no room to spin it. The scary part isn't the collapse, it's the timeline. How long did they know before saying it out loud? Let's rewind to the single sentence that changed everything. The sentence that changed everything. Thor Industries' chief executive said the quiet part out loud during a closed investor call, and it detonated the electric motorhome story instantly. He admitted plainly that the company overbuilt the electric RV dream and that the market for it has collapsed. This was not a slip. It was not phrased as a challenge or a delay. It was delivered as fact. The timing matters. This admission came after years of confident public messaging that framed electric motorhomes as disciplined growth, carefully aligned with demand. One sentence erased that narrative. Overbuilt means excess inventory and capital trapped upstream. Collapsed means demand did not pause, it failed. Investors understood immediately why the language was dangerous. Executives do not use words like collapse unless internal data leaves no room to soften reality. This was not said during a recall or an economic shock. It was said after production decisions were already locked in. That detail changes everything. It reframes the entire electric motorhome push as a known miscalculation, not bad luck. If leadership could describe the outcome so clearly now, the real question becomes unavoidable. How long did they know before admitting it? That unanswered gap is where the financial damage began accumulating quietly inside Thor. To understand how this confession became inevitable, the original promise has to be examined first. The electric promise that never matched reality. Electric motorhomes were sold as the future, not an experiment. Marketing language leaned heavily on sustainability, silence, and progress. The message was consistent. Cleaner travel without sacrifice. Familiar freedom with modern responsibility. Corporate presentations framed electric RVs as the next logical step, already viable and ready to scale. The emphasis stayed on vision, not verification. Charging expansion was treated as a given. Usage was assumed to mirror traditional travel habits with minor adjustments. Early concept launches were portrayed as proof of readiness rather than limited trials. Repetition did the work. Over time, the idea hardened into accepted reality. Questioning it felt behind the curve. That is how momentum replaces scrutiny. The promise did not rely on deception. It relied on optimism being treated as evidence. The narrative moved faster than the numbers, and that gap widened quietly. By the time internal contradictions surfaced, belief was already baked in. When expectations are set this way, correction becomes painful. A product sold as inevitable leaves no room for hesitation. The promise sounded responsible and modern. It felt safe to trust. But it rested on assumptions that were never stress-tested publicly. That mismatch mattered more than any headline. Once belief outran reality, the underlying cost structure was never allowed to slow down. If this breakdown is helping you see what the headlines missed, support the work by liking the video, subscribing for future updates, and sharing your perspective in the comments. Your insight helps surface patterns early and keeps these warnings visible. The cost structure that made failure inevitable. Electric motorhomes carried a structural problem from the start. Battery systems, large enough to move a full-size RV, added massive weight, forcing reinforcements across frames, suspension, and braking. Each adjustment multiplied material use. Low production volume prevented scale efficiencies, keeping per-unit costs stubbornly high. Unlike passenger vehicles, electric motorhomes could not spread development across millions of units. Every build absorbed its full overhead. Manufacturing lines had to handle heavier assemblies and complex cooling systems, shrinking margins before a single unit shipped. Internal planning assumed rapid improvement, but physics did not cooperate. Energy density gains arrived slowly. Heat management consumed space and power. Weight ceilings forced compromises in layout and payload. These were not defects. They were unavoidable constraints. Software could not rewrite chemistry. Each iteration confirmed the same outcome. The platform punished scale instead of rewarding it. That reality existed long before public demand softened. Even steady output strained financial assumptions. The product was expensive to build and resistant to simplification. The math never lined up the way the story suggested. By the time the market reacted, the financial trap was already set upstream. While factories absorbed this pressure, the first rejection appeared elsewhere: the quiet dealer. Freeze. Before public narratives shifted, dealer behavior changed quietly. Orders for electric RVs slowed without explanation. Allocations were trimmed. Future requests were deferred. Floor plan exposure tied capital to inventory that lingered, increasing daily risk. This was not emotional. It was procedural. Dealers respond to numbers, not optimism. Units already delivered stayed longer on lots. Reorders failed to match projections. Internal paperwork reflected hesitation long before executives spoke publicly. No announcements were needed. Ordering patterns told the story. When confidence holds, orders accelerate. When risk rises, silence follows. This freeze mattered because it signaled belief had broken at the point closest to transactions. Showrooms did not advertise the pause, but logistics schedules reflected it. Transport volumes softened, storage filled. The disconnect between factory output and retail appetite widened. Once that gap appears, pricing always follows. Inventory pressure does not resolve quietly. It forces action downstream. By the time the chief executive admitted the collapse, the dealer network had already voted. They stopped believing first, and when dealers stop ordering, the market correction is no longer optional. What followed that freeze reshaped prices, timing, and every decision that came after. Loan math that killed the sale. When interest rates moved upward, the entire affordability equation shifted out of reach. Electric motorhome loans that once cleared underwriting easily began returning altered terms. A typical 5-year note that previously carried a low single-digit rate now arrived with numbers that doubled monthly obligations. On paper, the vehicle did not change. On contracts, everything did. Lenders tightened approval bands, shortened terms, and demanded higher down payments to offset perceived risk. The result was mechanical, not emotional. Monthly payments crossed from manageable into prohibitive in a single renewal cycle. Internal dealer worksheets showed the same unit moving from a comfortable payment to a figure that erased flexibility. Approvals slowed, then stalled. Applications that would have passed automatically now required secondary review, additional documentation, or were declined outright. Financing desks spent more time recalculating than closing. This was not about hesitation. It was arithmetic. When payment schedules exceed household tolerance, motivation becomes irrelevant. Even buyers prepared to commit encountered ceilings they could not bypass. The sale did not fail at the showroom. It failed at the calculator, where optimism has no leverage. Even with approval slowing, the next failure emerged quickly. The range reality no one budgeted for. Once paperwork cleared, real-world use exposed limits that brochures never stressed. Electric motorhomes behave differently under load, and travel amplifies every constraint. Towing weight reduced usable distance faster than projected. Climate control pulled constant energy during heat or cold, shrinking margins further. Elevation changes and headwinds compounded the draw. Trips that once relied on intuition now required spreadsheets. Drivers monitored remaining charge instead of scenery. Charging sessions stretched longer than planned, turning stops into schedules. What looked sufficient on a flat test loop became restrictive across varied terrain. Range ratings assumed ideal conditions rarely met on extended travel. The mismatch created friction that accumulated mile after mile. Detours were avoided, side trips were skipped, routes narrowed, planning replaced spontaneity. For a platform sold on freedom, the experience felt conditional. Travel habits adjusted not because of preference, but necessity. This was not fear-driven. It was observed reality repeating consistently. The limitation was not theoretical. It surfaced on highways, campgrounds, and secondary roads. Once the pattern became familiar, enthusiasm cooled quietly. Distance stopped being an abstraction and became a daily constraint that shaped every decision. Infrastructure limitations made constraints unavoidable. Charging infrastructure that couldn't support the size. Public charging networks were built with passenger vehicles in mind, not 30-foot motorhomes. Stall spacing, cable reach, and curb geometry assumed compact footprints. Larger rigs blocked access or required awkward positioning that slowed turnover. Sites designed for quick stops became choke points during peak hours. Charging sessions extended because battery capacity demanded sustained draw, not brief top-offs. Waiting times lengthened as fewer compatible stalls were available. Maneuvering into position added friction that planners never modeled. Pull-through access remained rare. When stations filled, Options narrowed quickly. Some locations discouraged use entirely due to physical constraints. This was not a software issue. It was concrete, paint, and layout. The network scaled uneven, favoring urban corridors over rural routes. Long stretches offered limited redundancy, forcing conservative planning. Operators posted time limits that conflicted with large battery needs. The result was predictable. Travel became contingent on infrastructure tolerance rather than destination choice. These barriers were consistent across regions and repeated trip after trip. They did not improve with familiarity. Each stop reinforced the same bottleneck. Over time, the inconvenience translated into action without public explanation anywhere. Falling values exposed final break. Depreciation that hit faster than anyone expected. Secondary markets delivered the first unfiltered verdict. Auction lanes showed electric motorhomes clearing at discounts that surprised lenders and sellers alike. Guide values lagged behind reality, creating gaps between expectation and transaction. Trade in offers arrived lower than modeled, reflecting cautious revaluation. Units with minimal use still reset downward once comparable sales printed. The adjustment moved quickly because liquidity was thin. Fewer bids meant sharper drops. Financing balances failed to track the speed of decline, leaving negative equity exposed early. Dealers recorded widening spreads between acquisition and exit numbers. Internal sheets reflected losses before retail pricing adjusted publicly. This compression mattered because it removed optionality. Owners seeking flexibility found none. Values recalibrated based on execution, not intention. Once auction results established a floor, every reference followed. The sequence was mechanical. A single weak sale pulled the next lower. That pattern repeated across regions. The effect concentrated on electric platforms first, where uncertainty demanded higher risk discounts. Depreciation arrived faster than timelines assumed, collapsing confidence. When asset values destabilize this rapidly, upstream decisions change, capital retreats, production slows, strategy shifts. That chain reaction was already forming. Manufacturer response followed collapsing values. Production cuts without press releases. Production changes began quietly, without announcements or slide decks. Shifts were trimmed, then paused at facilities tied to electric RV assembly. Internal schedules shortened from full weeks to partial runs, reducing output without triggering public alerts. Platform launches slipped from calendars, described internally as timing adjustments rather than cancellations. None of this appeared in press releases. Suppliers received revised volumes first, then transport firms saw fewer pickups. Workers noticed hours thinning before executives acknowledged anything externally. This pattern mattered because it showed reaction, not leadership. Output was being throttled in. Response to pressure already felt downstream. Lines capable of building electric units sat idle longer between runs. Inventory targets were lowered quietly. The pullback spread unevenly, creating pockets of inactivity that never reached headlines. Management avoided language that implied retreat, but paperwork reflected it clearly. Production is where optimism meets constraint, and constraint won. Yet, despite these reductions, the imbalance persisted. Unsold units remained, and adjustments lagged conditions. Cutting output slowed accumulation, but did not reverse it. The system had already absorbed too much momentum to stop cleanly. Reducing volume addressed symptoms, not structure, and the numbers kept refusing to cooperate. That failure exposed a deeper limit. Schedules alone could the physics wall. Engineering teams ran into boundaries that planning could not bypass. Battery energy density improved slowly, but not fast enough to offset mass. Large packs added weight that cascaded through frames, suspension, and braking systems. Heat management became a constant constraint, especially during sustained charging and long climbs. Cooling solutions consumed space and power, shrinking usable capacity further. Every attempt to compensate introduced a trade-off elsewhere. Software updates could smooth delivery, but not create energy. Physics enforced ceilings that optimism ignored. Range targets shrank under real loads, revealing limits that no calibration could erase. Weight ceilings capped payload and forced compromises across layouts. These were not defects. They were natural consequences of chemistry and scale. Passenger vehicles could hide inefficiencies through volume and iteration. Electric RVs could not. Each unit carried the full burden of its design. Testing cycles confirmed the same outcome repeatedly. Gains arrived incrementally, not exponentially. Timelines stretched as breakthroughs failed to materialize. Expectations adjusted quietly as constraints hardened. The gap between promise and capability remained. No shortcut existed. No patch could rewrite mass or heat. This wall stood firm, regardless of effort, making quick recovery impossible. Once limits proved immovable, attention shifted away from engineering entirely then, the strategic step away from electric. With technical progress constrained, leadership redirected focus without fanfare. Internal discussions emphasized balance across product lines rather than acceleration of electric platforms. Hybrid concepts reappeared in planning documents, positioned as interim solutions instead of compromises. Budgets were reassigned toward proven architectures with predictable outcomes. Development timelines for electric projects lengthened as resources flowed elsewhere. Staffing allocations reflected the same recalibration. Teams, once dedicated exclusively to electric RV advancement, were redistributed. The language shifted subtly from expansion to evaluation. Capital discipline replaced ambition in internal messaging. This was not abandonment announced publicly. It was reprioritization executed quietly. Portfolio reviews favored stability over experimentation. Meeting notes referenced optionality and flexibility rather than commitment. The center of gravity moved. Electric initiatives lost protected status and entered competition for funding. That change carried weight. Projects survive on sponsorship, and sponsorship had thinned. Leadership framed adjustments as prudent stewardship, but the direction was unmistakable. Momentum slowed as attention dispersed. Without concentrated backing, progress decelerated further. The platform entered a holding pattern, waiting on conditions unlikely to change quickly. That shift did not go unnoticed beyond the company walls, because analysts tracking allocations saw electric programs lose priority, while other segments quietly absorbed attention internally first. Investors pull the plug. Financial markets respond faster than press cycles. Updated guidance reduced exposure to electric motorhome revenue, signaling tempered expectations. Projections were revised downward, reflecting slower throughput and longer payback horizons. Analyst notes shifted tone, emphasizing caution and risk weighting. Coverage framed electric RV segments as optional rather than central. Capital expenditures earmarked previously were deferred or reclassified. Funding flowed toward areas with immediate returns and clearer demand signals. This reallocation mattered because capital defines continuity. Without it, programs stall regardless of intent. Shareholder communications avoided enthusiasm, focusing instead on liquidity and preservation. Questions centered on discipline, not growth. Forward statements narrowed. The absence of aggressive targets spoke loudly. Markets priced direction as much as performance. As capital retreated, confidence followed. Electric motorhome initiatives moved to the margins of forecasts. That repositioning limited future leverage. Once investment thins, recovery slows. Momentum cannot be summoned without backing. The signal was clear and measurable. Electric programs would proceed cautiously, if at all. When funding tightens, risk shifts downstream. Exposure does not disappear, it relocates. With capital stepping back, financial risk settled elsewhere, moving from balance sheets toward owners and lenders, waiting downstream without cushions or early warnings. As timelines extended and exit options narrowed, owners caught in the middle. Ownership sits in an uncomfortable gap when priorities change upstream. Electric motorhome owners face exposure that never appears on brochures or window stickers. Warranty coverage depends on continued parts production, and uncertainty rises when platforms lose attention. Service networks thin quietly as specialized technicians are reassigned. Repairs take longer, components arrive slower, resale pressure builds as comparable listings linger without movement. Trade offers arrive cautiously, reflecting risk rather than mileage. Paper values no longer match exit reality. Owners who expected stability find timing working against them. The vehicle itself has not failed, yet confidence surrounding it has weakened. That difference matters financially. Support ecosystems exist only while commitment remains visible. When attention shifts, assurance fades. Owners absorb that change directly through longer downtimes and narrower options. None of this is announced formally. It is felt through delays, questions, and reduced responsiveness. The exposure is personal and immediate, not abstract. Decisions once framed as lifestyle choices now carry financial weight. Holding becomes a calculation instead of a default. Selling feels constrained. Waiting feels uncertain. The position is uncomfortable precisely because it is unresolved. Confidence erodes gradually. That erosion does not stay isolated. Sustainable travel takes a credibility hit. Electric motorhomes were positioned as symbols of progress, and credibility matters when symbols falter. Public trust weakens not from one headline, but from accumulated disappointment. When early promises stall, skepticism fills the gap. Conversations shift from excitement to caution. Momentum slows because belief drives adoption before practicality does. Once belief wavers, hesitation spreads. Prospective users question durability, support, and long-term commitment. Demonstrations no longer convince on their own. The narrative loses authority. This erosion affects how future platforms are received, regardless of merit. Sustainable travel depends on confidence as much as capability. When trust falters, timelines stretch and adoption pauses. Innovation waits for reassurance that does not arrive quickly. Messaging becomes restrained, reflecting uncertainty rather than ambition. Partnerships delay announcements. Pilot programs extend without scaling. The effect is subtle but persistent. Public enthusiasm does not rebound on schedule. That hesitation reshapes planning assumptions. Development cycles slow as expectations reset. The cost of rebuilding trust exceeds the cost of launching products. Credibility, once spent, takes time to restore. Until it does, progress remains cautious. The consequence is not rejection, but distance. Interest stays observational, not participatory. Momentum returns after proof rebuilds confidence. With trust strained, manufacturers adjust behavior. Innovation slows to survival mode. As conditions tightened, manufacturers adjusted behavior toward survival. Product catalogs narrowed. Fewer electric RV variants moved forward, while established drivetrains regained priority. Development cycles lengthened, favoring durability over novelty. Resources shifted toward components with known supply chains and predictable service paths. Experimentation slowed because mistakes carried higher cost. Engineering focused on incremental refinement rather than bold redesign. This conservatism was intentional. Stable platforms reduced exposure and simplified support. Model lineups reflected caution through familiar layouts and proven systems. Innovation did not vanish, but its pace changed. Risk tolerance contracted across planning meetings. Launch schedules stretched. Optional features were trimmed. The goal became consistency, not surprise. That shift protected cash flow, but limited advancement. Buyers encountered fewer choices and slower updates. The market adjusted expectations downward. Progress measured itself in reliability metrics rather than headlines. This environment rewards patience and penalizes speculation. The lesson extends beyond electric motorhomes. When cycles turn, ambition yields to resilience. Companies preserve what works before attempting what might. This pattern repeats across industries facing contraction. Observing it here provides a warning signal. The slowdown is not temporary enthusiasm loss. It is structural recalibration that defines the next phase of development. Conditions remain tight until confidence returns. That recalibration reframes earlier admissions. The real meaning of "we overbuilt the dream." The phrase "overbuilt the dream" deserves far more attention than a passing headline because it signals more than a single bad quarter or a misaligned product launch. It reveals a deeper pattern that shows up whenever optimism outpaces verification. When momentum builds, companies start assuming the future will behave like the past. Demand curves are treated as stable. Excitement is mistaken for evidence, and expansion accelerates before the hard stress tests, financial, technical, and logistical, have even begun. That is how vulnerability spreads across multiple product cycles, not just one. The real lesson isn't that progress is dangerous, it's that progress must be paced against reality. Timing matters more than ambition. Capital surges first, long before consequences surface. And when the cycle turns, the companies that survive are the ones that recognized early signals instead of waiting for public confirmation. Those signals almost always appear in quiet places. Ordering behavior shifts. Development timelines stretch. Market enthusiasm softens, not dramatically, but consistently. Recognizing those cues changes everything. Waiting preserves options. Acting late removes them. Markets reward restraint when uncertainty rises, yet punish overcommitment when confidence fades. That's why it's critical to measure enthusiasm against durability, follow through against promises, and consistency against acceleration. These habits matter not just in electric motorhomes. They repeat in every industry where innovation meets scale. The next correction, whatever sector it hits, will reveal itself through the same subtle deviations. Thor's admission may have ended the era of electric motorhome hype, but it opened the door to something more valuable: clarity. If you have questions about this shift or want deeper breakdowns, drop them in the comments and I'll cover them in future updates. If this helped you see the bigger pattern, hit like so more people catch it early. And subscribe for real-time analysis, because timing, not hype, is what protects you in markets like this.